Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be going through some declassified CIA documents.
Oh,
I
exciting.
know, right? It's going to be pretty interesting. We're going to be looking at a memo from 1957
Okay.
about Soviet desalination research.
Wow.
So back in the 50s, they were already trying to figure out how to turn salt water into fresh water.
That's pretty fascinating.
I thought so too. And you were the one who shared this document with me, so I
Mm.
appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It's a real time capsule from the Cold War.
It is.
It gives us a peek into what the U.S. intelligence community thought they knew about Soviet capabilities at the time.
And what I find so interesting is that the Soviets seemed very concerned
Mm-hmm.
with figuring out this problem of turning salt water into fresh water, especially for agricultural use.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about having enough drinking water. They wanted to be able to use this to boost food production.
Right.
It makes you wonder if this was just about practical needs or was there something else going on?
That's a great question, and the memo actually gives us some clues. So, if you remember, this was a time when the USSR was facing some serious food shortages.
Right.
They had vast stretches of land,
Huge country.
but a lot of it was arid or semi-arid. So desalination, especially if they could do it cheaply and efficiently, could have been a total game changer for their agriculture.
So it's like they were looking for a technological solution to a geopolitical problem.
Exactly. And the memo actually goes into the different methods that they were exploring.
Oh, wow.
So some of these might sound familiar, like distillation,
Mhm.
where you basically boil water and collect the steam, leaving the salt behind.
Yeah, we still use that today, right?
We do. It's a very common method. That's essentially what electrodialysis does. And the memo suggests that the Soviets might have even been ahead of the U.S. in this area.
Wait, really? Ahead of the U.S.?
Yeah.
That's kind of wild, especially considering this was, the height of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Weren't we supposed to be winning the technology race?
Oh, technology doesn't always follow political lines.
Right.
And there was a lot of secrecy on both sides, so who was truly ahead is still debated by historians.
That makes sense. So distillation and electrodialysis, it sounds like, those were the front runners.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But the memo also mentioned some other methods like freezing and ion exchange.
Yeah, those were being explored, but they weren't as efficient or as cost-effective, at least not for large-scale desalination.
Okay.
Freezing, as you might imagine, is pretty energy-intensive.
Yeah, for sure.
And then ion exchange, I don't know if you remember learning about that in chemistry class.
Vaguely. It's something about using resins to remove the salt.
Right, it's like using a super sponge to soak up the salt.
Yeah.
So it can be useful for purifying water or treating water that's already kind of brackish, but it wasn't really practical for turning seawater into fresh water on a massive scale.
Okay, so it seems like the Soviets were really focusing on distillation and electrodialysis as their kind of best bets for making this work for agriculture.
Exactly. And they were especially interested in solar distillation,
Oh, interesting.
which uses the sun's energy to evaporate the water.
Almost like a giant greenhouse that turns salt water into fresh water.
You got it.
That sounds pretty ingenious, actually.
Yeah.
Especially for a country with as much sunshine as the Soviet Union.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is they had a really long history with this technology. The memo even mentions a solar distillation unit used by the Russian army back in 1872.
1872. Wow. That's way before I would have thought that that kind of technology even existed.
It's pretty amazing.
So it seems like the Soviets were way ahead of their time in some ways.
Well, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. They
Right.
had a real pressing need to find ways to expand their agricultural output. And solar distillation seemed like a really promising solution, especially for those sun-drenched southern regions of the Soviet Union.
It's amazing how this memo gives us not just a glimpse into the science, but also the motivations and the historical context.
It really does. And it gets even more interesting when we look at some of the specific individuals who were involved in this research.
Wow.
So the memo mentions a Soviet scientist named V.A. Baum,
Okay.
who seems to have made quite a splash in the world of solar distillation.
Oh, okay. I got to hear more about this guy.
Well, he presented his work at a major international symposium back in 1954
Wow.
and even traveled to Egypt to consult on solar distillation projects.
It sounds like he was like a desalination rock star.
Yeah, kind of like a celebrity in that world.
A desalination rock star in the 1950s. That's a mental image I won't soon forget.
I know, right?
But seriously, it seems like his work really caught the attention of the CIA.
It did.
They must have thought he was onto something big.
Absolutely. Remember, this was a time when solar energy was still a relatively new field.
Right.
Boehm's work on solar distillation, especially its potential for these large-scale applications, was definitely ahead of its time.
So we've got the Soviets trying to solve their food problem with desalination. We've got a potential tech race with the U.S., and we've got this like pioneering scientist who's pushing the boundaries of solar energy. This is shaping up to be quite the story.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, no.
This memo also provides some fascinating insights into how Soviet research was organized, the costs they were projecting for desalination, and some of the challenges that they were facing.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Well, one thing that might surprise you is that even back then, they were already thinking about the economics of desalination.
Really?
Yeah, the memo actually includes some cost estimates. And get this, they were predicting that the best methods could produce fresh water for as little as 30 cents per 1,000 gallons.
30 cents. Seriously. That seems crazy cheap,
Hmm.
especially compared to what we pay for water today. I mean, were they just being like overly optimistic?
Well, it's important to remember that those were just estimates based on the technology and costs of the time.
Okay.
Things like energy prices and materials have changed a lot since then.
Right.
Plus, those estimates likely didn't account for things like environmental impacts, which we're much more aware of today.
Yeah, that's a good point. So even though they were making progress, it sounds like desalination wasn't exactly a quick fix, even back then.
Yeah, exactly. The memo acknowledges that even at those projected prices, desalination was still too expensive for most agricultural uses.
Huh.
It was seen as more viable for industrial and municipal needs.
So it seems like they were facing some of the same challenges that we still face today, trying to balance the need for fresh water with the cost and the potential environmental impacts.
Absolutely. And this memo really highlights that desalination isn't a silver bullet solution. It's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to managing water resources.
Which makes me think about Baum again, that desalination rock star. It seems like he was really onto something with this focus on solar distillation. I mean, even back then, they were recognizing the potential of renewable energy.
Right. It's almost like he was a visionary, seeing the link between sustainable energy and water solutions decades before it became mainstream.
It makes you wonder, what would someone like Baum think about the state of desalination today?
Yeah.
I mean, we've come a long way in terms of technology, but we're still grappling with many of the same issues.
That's a really fascinating question to consider. Um, I'm sure he'd be impressed by the advancements in membrane technology and the sheer scale of some modern desalination plants.
I bet.
But he might also be disappointed that solar-powered desalination hasn't become more widespread.
You know, this whole deep dive has really made me think about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
We often hear about water scarcity as a modern problem, but it's clear that people have been struggling with this for a long time.
For sure, and it's a global issue. What was happening in the Soviet Union in the 1950s has parallels all over the world. People have always been searching for ways to access fresh water, especially in arid regions.
It makes you appreciate the ingenuity and determination of people like Baum,
Right. Yeah.
trying to find solutions even with limited resources and technology.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that the quest for sustainable water solutions is an ongoing journey. There's no finish line.
It also makes you wonder, who are the modern-day equivalents of Baum out there today?
Ooh,
Who are the unsung heroes pushing the boundaries of water technology?
that's a great question. I'm sure there are countless researchers and engineers working on innovative water solutions all over the world. They might not be household names,
Right.
but their work is just as crucial.
And maybe, just maybe, they're listening to this deep dive right now, getting inspired to keep pushing the boundaries. If that's you out there, we salute you.
Here. The future of water depends on people like you, those who are willing to think outside the box and challenge conventional thinking.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The Soviets' motivations for desalination, the different methods they were exploring, the costs, the challenges, and even the story of V.A. Baum, the desalination rock star. But I'm curious, what really stood out to you from this memo?
For me, it's the reminder that history often repeats itself. The challenges the Soviets were facing in the 1950s, food security, water scarcity, the need for innovative solutions are still very much with us today.
Yeah.
And just like back then, it's going to take a combination of ingenuity, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the status quo to find lasting solutions.
You know, that's a really powerful point. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day headlines and forget that these challenges have deep roots. But looking back at history can give us valuable insights and inspiration as we navigate the future.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
People have been wrestling with these issues for generations, and we can learn from their successes and their failures.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Soviet desalination research, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that innovation often comes out of necessity.
Yeah.
Like the Soviets were facing some pretty serious challenges,
Mhm.
and they were willing to explore all sorts of creative solutions, even if they seemed a little out there at the time.
Right.
And that kind of bold thinking is what we need today as we face our own water challenges.
It's like they were saying, okay, we need to find a way to turn salt water
Yeah.
into fresh water,
Mm.
and we're not going to let anything stop us.
Exactly. We need to be willing to push boundaries, to question assumptions, and to embrace new ideas, even if they seem a little unconventional at first.
Yeah, because who knows, maybe the next big breakthrough in water technology is just around the corner.
Right.
Maybe it's something that seems crazy now, but in a few years, it'll be commonplace.
Yeah, and maybe it's something that someone listening to this deep dive will be inspired to invent.
I love that thought. So to everyone out there who's passionate about water, who's concerned about the future, or who just loves a good deep dive into history, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep innovating,
Yeah.
because the world needs your ideas, your passion, and your willingness to make a difference.
Well said. And remember, the quest for sustainable water solutions. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
It really is.
There will be setbacks, there will be challenges, but with persistence and collaboration, we can create a future where everyone has access to the clean, fresh water they need.
This has been such a fascinating journey back in time.
It has.
Who knew a declassified CIA document could be so insightful? It just goes to show that you never know where you'll find inspiration or what hidden gems are waiting to be discovered.
And you never know what impact a single deep dive can have. Maybe it sparks a new idea, rekindles an old passion, or simply reminds us that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves.
That's a perfect note to end on. So to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as we did.
Until next time, stay curious.